Through this presentation, we are going to explore the Kalinga style of architecture, and we will focus on the significant elements and characters those have influenced the evolution of shapes of different temple forms in the milieu of Odisha temple architecture. Odisha is famous for its rich heritage of the temples over the centuries. The Odisha Staphytes have produced numerous temples which can rival the best work created elsewhere in India. And being a land of ancient and sacred temples, a state where religions with many philosophies flourish, is thronged by pilgrims throughout the year. Next, we will look up the objectives of the presentation. So, this presentation we will try to study the phases of evolution of temple architecture, to study the various elements of Odisha temple architecture, shapes and geometrical aspects of temple, and factor geometry analysis. Odisha, with its fascinating series of temples, form an exciting area to study the evolution of temple architecture. Though differing in dimensions and details, the Temple of Odisha form one of the most homogeneous architectural groups in India. The temples of Odisha portray a picture of organic evolution from Parshurameshwara temple to Lingaraj and many more. The temples are divided into the four phases. The first phase is the chromatic phase, which starts from 6th century AD to 9th century AD. In this phase, the mostly temples built in a three-rath plan. The most famous temples of this phase are Mohini, Parshurameshwar and Nandi. The second phase starts from 9th century AD to 11th century AD, which is known as a transitional phase. In this phase, the Mukhashala transformed into a rectangular hall, and the most spectacular work of this phase are Mukteshwar Temple, Markaneshwara Temple and Nandita. Next, it is followed by the mature phase, which dates back to 11th to 13th century AD. The Bhog Mandapa and the Nat Mandapa were introduced in this phase, and the temples were mostly in the form of Pancharath plan. The fourth phase is the phase of decadence, where the temple activities come to halt. Moving ahead, now we will throw some light on the style of architecture of these temples. The Indian Silpastras recognize mainly three categories of the temple style: the Nagara, Dravida, and Visara. But there was also another style very prominently known as Kalinga style of architecture, which is very distinguished all over the world for its unique characteristics that existed between 6th century AD to 16th century AD in Odisha. This style of architecture is explained exclusively in the text of Bhuvan Pratap, Silpa Praksha and Silpa Ratnakosh, etc. In Kalinga style of architecture, the two superstructures were Jagmohan and Dual, but later two more structures, Nat Mandapa and Bhog Mandapa, were added to it. Again, the Kalinga style of architecture can be categorized into three major types. The curvilinear shaped temple form known as Dekhadol was most preferable style for construction of Garbhagriha or Viman. For the added-on parts like Jagmohan and Nat Mandapa, Dekhadol style was adopted. Added to that, going away from the traditional practices of Shaiva and Vaishnava temples, Khakar style was followed, and today existing Shakta temples like Betala Deol temples of Bhubaneswar or Charashi temple of Cuttack falls in this category. In this picture, we can see the temples which were built through these styles. Also, there are two minor categories: Hypathel style, these are the temples without roofs, and the second is Gaudiya temple with terracotta walls and curved roofs. Now, in first picture, we try to explain how much temple construction work took place in the course of time, evolution of. Second picture depicts the two most famous platforms of Rekhadol, Trirath and Pancharath, which use Euclidean geometry with making different iterations in the existing platforms. Now we will jump into the study the fractal elements of the temple. The development associated evolution cannot be spoken just by scaling. There is also a development in the complex structure of the developing shapes. The process of recursive and formatting. On the short note, the whole temple forms results from a difficult connecting and grouping of these separate 3D forms in a combined attire. In figure 3, we can depict the plan shapes of Vimana changed from internal square shape to a changed circular shape in the time change. In figure 4, a recursive process is used which is connecting self-similar repetition in a progressively shrinking scale which is often used to produce the shapes of different elements of the shrine. In this simplest shape, it could be Dvirath having only two propagation, Triyanga, where an additional member called Pratirath is inserted between Bhadra and Kona. Similarly, with more iteration plans like Chaturbhanga and Panchbhanga made. Next in the row, we have description of the evolution of Shikhar. The replication of equal forms, either in vertical or horizontal, is another frequently used process to add visual complexity to the temple. Now we will look at some famous temples of Odisha. Here we have a spectacular Jagannath Temple, which was constructed by the famous king of Ganga dynasty, Anantavarman Deva in 12th century AD. There are mainly three deities in the temple. The first is Sri Jagannath, which is also known as a deity of industry. The second is Sri Balbhadra, which is known as a deity of agro-industries. And the third is Ma Subhadra, which is also known as a deity of knowledge. Now look at some scientific background of the temple. The Neel Chakra on the temple, of the top of the temple, was made by an alloy of 8 metals known as Ashtadhatu and connects with a long copper plate. It saves temples from rain, thunder and other natural calamities, as it is believed. The second is Garud Stambh, which is made with the root of a tree recognized by Ayurvedic science. The pillar is 16-sided and a monolith of chloride. Moving ahead, we will look into some of the architectural features of the temple. The huge temple complex covers an area of around 4 lakh square feet and is surrounded by a fortified wall. The temple is divided into 4 sections. The first is Dwar, which is also known as Viman or Garbhagriha. The second is Mukhashala, which is a frontal porch. The third is Nat Mandir, which is also known as Nat Mandapa. And the fourth is Bhog Mandapa, which is an offering hall. The main temple is curvilinear temple and is crowned the top with the Sri Chakra, which is an 8-spoke key. Here we have a plan form of the temple, which is being evaluated from the temples of the 6th and 7th century. Next, we have a front and a rear elevation of Jagannath Temple. Moving ahead, we have a right elevation of the Jagannath Temple. Now, here is an explanation why birds don't fly generally over the Sri Mandira. It may not be the case always, but it is possible that during some seasons, due to high-speed sea wind, moving along the Shikhar may lead to the formation of eddies. There is nothing but an occasional phenomena of Karman vortex street. In fluid dynamics, the Karman vortex street is a repeating pattern of swirling vortices caused by an unsteady separation of flow of a fluid around the blunt body. The vortex street leads to the sudden change in the air directions near the ceiling heights of small birds, which is not desired by the birds as birds used to travel the places where they have seen the least resistance. Next in the row, we have that by no shadow of the temple falls on the ground at any time of the day. So this happens because the base of the Viman is bigger than its pinnacle. Hence at noon the shadow of the temple's tower gets merged on itself and not on the ground. Next we look up to the interesting facts of the temple, which is also called to be the myths of the temple, which has to be researched. The flag flows in the opposite direction of the wind and changed every day at sunset and is changed every day. The Sudarshan Chak fitted on the top of the temple can be seen from any corner of the Puri city. While you enter the Singh Dwar, which is the main door of the entrance of the temple, you can clearly hear the sound waves, but once you pass the Singh Dwar, simply take a turn and walk in the same direction. You will no longer hear the sound of the waves. In fact, you will not hear the sound of the waves as long as you are inside the temple, which is interesting. Next, we have Lingaraj Temple, which is also known as a symbol of synchronization of Oriya culture. It was built in 11th century by Rajati Keshari. The noted critic and historian James Ferguson lauded the temples as one of the most finest example of purely Hindu temples in India. Now we look up to the details about this temple. It was built in 11th century and is dedicated to Lord Shiva. It is being considered as the largest temple of the city Bhubaneswar, which is built in red stone and is a classic example of Kalinga style of architecture. The sprawling temple complex has 150 subsidiary shrines. The temple is referred to as Swambhu, which is known as a self-originated Shiva. Lingaraj Temple is one of those temples of Odisha which has all the forms of the Kalinga style of architecture, which means that it has all the doors which we see in the Kalinga style of architecture. Next, we have the formation of the temple. The temple can be broadly divided into four main halls. The first is Garbhagriha, the second is Yajna Mandapa, the third is Natya Mandapa, and the fourth is Bhog Mandapa, where devotees can have the prasad of the Lord. Near the temple, there is a Hindu Sagar lake, and the water here is believed to contain a little of every holy river and the lake in the country, which makes is unique from all other temples in Odisha. Next, we have a references that we use to cover this research. Now, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for lending your ears.